The flicker of candlelight dances across ancient stone as a man kneels in the dust, his breath shallow with anticipation. It's November 26, 1922, and Howard Carter's trembling hands make the final breakthrough into a hidden chamber. Peering through the small hole, his patron Lord Carnarvon asks, "Can he see anything?" Carter's reply echoes through history. Yes, wonderful things. What he discovered that day would become the most famous archaeological find of all time, the untouched tomb of Tutankhamun, filled with golden treasures untouched for over 3,000 years. But behind the glittering masks and dazzling artifacts lay a darker mystery, one that still haunts historians today. Tutankhamun was just 19 years old when he died, a boy king ruling an empire, his life cut short under circumstances so strange they fueled whispers of curses and foul play for centuries. Was it illness, an accident, or something far more sinister? The truth is buried beneath layers of time, politics, and legend. Some say the pharaoh's tomb carried a curse, pointing to the untimely deaths of those who first opened it. Others believe the real curse was human ambition, a web of betrayal stretching back to the royal court itself. Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows of ancient Egypt to unravel the secrets of Tutankhamun's suspicious death. From the baffling injuries on his mummy to the missing records of his reign, every clue leads deeper into a mystery older than the pyramids. Were the wounds on his body evidence of a chariot crash or murder? Why were so many relics from his reign deliberately defaced, and what role did his powerful advisors play in his sudden demise? The answers lie waiting just beyond the torchlight where history and legend collide. This is the story of a king whose death was only the beginning. Tutankhamun ascended the throne at just 9 or 10 years old, inheriting an empire in chaos. His father, Akhenaten, had turned Egypt upside down by abandoning the traditional gods, declaring the sun disk Aten as the sole deity, and moving the capital to an entirely new city. This radical shift, known as the Amarna Revolution, left temples neglected, priests alienated, and the people confused. By the time young Tut took power, Egypt was a kingdom desperate for stability. His reign became a bridge between chaos and tradition, a quiet but crucial restoration. Though his rule lasted less than a decade, Tutankhamun made his mark. He undid his father's religious reforms, returning Egypt to the old ways, reopening temples, restoring the worship of Ammon, and moving the capital back to Thebes. The people celebrated, but the young king's authority was fragile. Scholars believe he likely ruled under the guidance of powerful advisors, particularly the Vizier I and the General Hormheb. These men may have held the real power while the boy king played his ceremonial role. Modern CT scans of Tutankhamun's mummy reveal a fragile ruler plagued by health issues, a club foot that would have made walking painful, repeated bouts of malaria, and even a cleft palate. Some experts suggest these ailments may have weakened him, making him dependent on his court. But don't mistake frailty for irrelevance. The treasures buried with him, elaborate golden chariots, ceremonial daggers, and ornate thrones, show he was no mere puppet. His reign was short, yes, but it laid the foundation for Egypt's return to greatness under his successors. Yet mystery lingers. Why were so many records of Tutankhamun's reign erased or overwritten by later kings? Why did his burial lack the grandeur of other pharaohs despite his royal bloodline? Some believe his sudden death forced a rushed burial. Others whisper that those who came after him, men like Hormheb, who eventually seized the throne, deliberately downplayed his legacy. One thing is certain, Tutankhamun's brief life was far more consequential than history initially remembered, and his death, that's where the real intrigue begins. The moment Howard Carter's chisel broke through the sealed doorway, he knew this tomb was unlike any other. While every royal burial site in the Valley of the Kings had been plundered over the centuries, Tutankhamun's resting place, designated KV-62, remained miraculously intact. The air inside was thick with the scent of ancient resins, undisturbed for 3,200 years. Stepping into the antechamber, Carter's team found a scene frozen in time. Gilded couches shaped like celestial cows, alabaster vases still holding traces of wine, and a disarray of golden chariots stacked haphazardly against the walls. This wasn't the orderly arrangement befitting a god-king. It was chaos, as if the burial had been thrown together in a frantic rush. Even more puzzling were the shrine walls, scorched black in strange patches. At first glance, it looked like evidence of fire, but modern analysis suggests something far more intriguing. The discoloration might have been caused by a chemical reaction, perhaps from the oils used in burial rituals, or even a botched attempt to erase the young pharaoh's name from history. Yet despite these signs of disorder, the inner burial chamber held a breathtaking sight. 4 golden shrines nested like Russian dolls, guarding a quartzite sarcophagus. Inside lay Tutankhamun's iconic gold funerary mask, its lapis lazuli and obsidian eyes staring into eternity. The contrast between this untouched treasure and the ransacked tombs of other pharaohs is staggering. While rulers like Ramses the Great were stripped of their valuables by grave robbers within centuries, Tutankhamun's burial survived intact purely by chance. His tomb had been buried under rubble from later constructions, hiding it from thieves until Carter's discovery. But the very things that preserved it, the rushed burial, the cramped space, even the blackened walls, hint at a deeper story. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a time capsule of panic, a silent witness to a kingdom scrambling to bury its king before the sands of time swallowed the truth. When Dr. Douglas Derry began his examination of Tutankhamun's mummy in 1925, he faced a puzzle wrapped in layers of linen and time. The body was in far worse condition than anyone expected, charred black in places as if scorched by an unseen fire. This wasn't the work of tomb robbers. Derry suspected the embalming oils had somehow ignited after burial, a chemical reaction baking the king's flesh into a brittle shell. But the surprises didn't end there. As the team peeled back the fragile wrappings, they discovered something alarming. The sternum and most of the ribs were missing. Had thieves hacked through the body searching for amulets, or was this a deliberate act, part of some forgotten funerary ritual? The gaping hole in the chest made it impossible to tell if vital organs had been removed properly as tradition demanded. Even more unsettling were the loose bone fragments rattling inside the skull. Derry initially dismissed them as damage from careless handling, but later examinations would cast doubt on that theory. The crude methods used to free Tutankhamun from his golden mask only added to the destruction. With no modern tools for delicate work, the team resorted to heating knives to melt the resin sealing the mask to the king's face. The brutal process left scars on the mummy, obscuring potential clues about his death. What might those marks have revealed if handled with today's technology? Every slice of those hot blades didn't just damage flesh and bone, it erased fragments of the story forever. Derry's examination, though groundbreaking for its time, was a product of its era. Archaeology then prioritized treasure over truth, spectacle over science. The rough handling and lost evidence haunt researchers to this day. Yet even with these limitations, Derry's notes provided the first tantalizing hints that Tutankhamun's death wasn't just tragic, it was deeply unnatural. The real mystery wasn't just how the young pharaoh died, but why so much of the evidence surrounding his demise seemed altered, hidden, or violently erased. For decades, Tutankhamun's mummy kept its secrets locked away, until 1968, when a team of British and Egyptian scientists aimed an X-ray machine at the young pharaoh's skull and sparked a forensic firestorm. The images revealed something startling, a loose bone fragment floating near the base of the cranium, along with what appeared to be thickening around the fracture site. To some researchers, this wasn't just damage from careless handling, it looked like evidence of a traumatic blow to the head. The whispers of murder grew louder. Could someone have struck the boy king down in a violent coup? The theory gained traction, especially when paired with historical records suggesting his advisors may have had motive. But science, like history, is a story of evolving perspectives. When a high-resolution CT scan was performed in 2005, the narrative shifted again. The advanced imaging showed no signs of healed fractures or pre-mortem trauma. The so-called murder weapon bone fragment, likely just the result of rough handling during either the original embalming process or the early examinations by Carter's team. The thickening around the skull fracture, now believed to be layers of resin poured by ancient embalmers to repair damage done during mummification. What once seemed like a smoking gun turned out to be a red herring, a reminder of how easy it is to misinterpret shadows on an X-ray. The side-by-side comparison of these two examinations tells a bigger story, not just about Tutankhamun's death, but about how forensic science itself has grown. The grainy X-rays of the 1960s were revolutionary for their time, but they lacked the precision to distinguish between ancient injuries and modern damage. The CT scan, with its ability to create a three-dimensional map of the mummy's bones, offered clarity where earlier technology could only speculate, yet even now questions linger. If it wasn't a blow to the head what caused Tutankhamun's untimely death, the answer may lie not in his skull, but in the secrets still hidden beneath the linen wrappings, secrets that future technologies may one day unravel. By 2005, the mystery of Tutankhamun's death had taken another dramatic turn, this time under the precise gaze of a cutting-edge CT scanner. Leading the examination was Dr. Zahi Hawass, Egypt's most famous archaeologist, who peered into the young pharaoh's remains with technology Carter's team could only dream of. The images revealed not one, but three critical clues hidden beneath the linen wrappings, each rewriting the narrative of Tutankhamun's final days. The first shock came with the left femur. A clean fracture ran through the bone, but unlike the skull controversy, this injury showed clear signs of occurring before death. Here's why that matters. In ancient Egypt, even a minor break could spell doom. Without antibiotics, an open wound could fester, turning a simple accident into a death sentence. Hawass's team theorized that this fracture, perhaps from a fall or collision, triggered a lethal infection, slowly poisoning the young king. But that wasn't the only injury. The scan also uncovered a devastating left knee fracture, so severe it would have left Tutankhamun unable to walk in his final days. This discovery reignited an old theory. Was Tutankhamun killed in a chariot crash? His tomb contained multiple chariots, and murals from the era show pharaohs racing at dizzying speeds during hunts or ceremonies. Imagine a teenage king, already frail from malaria and a club foot, losing control during a high-speed ride. The impact could have shattered his leg, torn his knee, and left him bleeding in the dust while infection crept in. Yet skeptics point out that royal charioteers were highly trained. Would a king's driver really risk such a catastrophic mistake? But the most haunting anomaly wasn't a wound at all, it was an absence. Tutankhamun's heart was missing. In Egyptian belief, the heart was the seat of the soul, weighed against the feather of Mat in the afterlife. Every royal mummy was carefully preserved with their heart intact except this one. Was it a brutal oversight by panicked embalmers or something more sinister? Some scholars suggest the heart might have been too damaged to save, perhaps destroyed in the same accident that killed him. Others whisper darker possibilities, that its removal was symbolic, a posthumous punishment erasing his very identity in the hereafter. Hawass's findings didn't just shift the debate, they shattered the murder theory's grip on history. No blow to the head, no conspiracy in the shadows. Instead, a tragic mosaic emerged, a sickly young man, his body failing, suffering a horrific accident that left him writhing in pain for days or weeks before succumbing. But even this explanation leaves gaps. Why did his courtiers bury him so hastily? Why were his successors so eager to erase his reign? The CT scan answered old questions, yes, but like every breakthrough in this mystery, it unearthed new ones. What's clearer now is how fragile Tutankhamun's world truly was. A single misstep, a chariot wheel catching sand, a leg snapping against stone could topple a king. His death wasn't just the end of a life, it was a crack in the foundation of a dynasty. And as the scanner's light faded, one truth remained. Science had brought us closer to the boy behind the golden mask, but his final moments are still wrapped in the silent linen of time. The golden mask hid more than just Tutankhamun's face. It concealed a bloodline tangled by centuries of royal tradition. In 2010, a groundbreaking DNA study peeled back those layers, revealing family secrets that shocked even seasoned Egyptologists. Scientists extracted genetic material from 11 royal mummies, including Tutankhamun himself, and the results painted a startling picture: the boy king's father. Almost certainly the heretic Pharaoh Akhenaten, the radical ruler who upended Egypt's religion. His mother, a mummy known only as the Younger Lady, discovered in a side chamber of Akhenaten's tomb, a woman who turned out to be not just his mother, but also his father's sister. This discovery explained so much: Tutankhamun's cleft palate, his club foot, even the cane found in his tomb, all potential signs of generational inbreeding. Royal Egyptians believed their divine bloodline must remain pure, but the cost of that purity became painfully clear in Tutankhamun's fragile bones. The study also identified two tiny mummies buried with him as his stillborn daughters, both showing severe deformities. Their short lives likely ended before they drew breath, their bodies curled beside their father for eternity. Then there was Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's wife, and also his half-sister. Scans of her mummy suggest she suffered spinal deformities, another probable result of the family's tightly knotted genealogy. Imagine these two teenagers, bound by blood and duty, ruling an empire while their bodies bore the weight of their ancestors' choices. The DNA evidence didn't just map a family tree, it exposed a dynasty crumbling under its own isolation. The study also solved a lingering mystery about Tutankhamun's missing wet nurse, Maya. Her tomb's inscriptions had long hinted at a close connection to the king, and the DNA confirmed it. She was likely another of his sisters, sent away to nurse him in secrecy. Every revelation from those lab tests wove a darker tapestry, a family so interwoven, so closed off from the world that their very genes became a trap. The Golden Boy of Egypt wasn't just a king. He was the product of a system that prized divine blood over survival, a system that may have doomed him before he ever took the throne. Yet the most haunting detail lies in those stillborn daughters. Their existence suggests Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun tried to secure an heir, desperate to continue their lineage. But the family's genetic legacy, the same one that granted them godhood, left their line teetering on extinction. By the time Tutankhamun died, the royal bloodline was a thread stretched to breaking. His death wasn't just the end of a life, it was the unraveling of a dynasty. And as modern science peers deeper into those ancient genes, one truth becomes undeniable. The greatest threat to Egypt's boy king wasn't enemies or assassins. It was his own golden blood. One of the most vivid clues about Tutankhamun's final moments comes from the chariots themselves, not just the ones buried with him, but the scenes painted on the walls of his tomb. These intricate artworks show the young king standing tall in his gilded chariot, reins taut in his hands, racing across the desert to hunt ostriches or lions. The images pulse with energy, the wheels blurred as if spinning at terrifying speed. To modern eyes, they look like snapshots of a king in motion, but could they also be hints of a tragedy waiting to happen? Forensic evidence adds weight to the theory. The CT scans revealed a pelvis fractured clean through, ribs crushed inward, and a left leg snapped like a twig, injuries eerily consistent with a high-impact collision. Imagine the scene: a teenage pharaoh, already unsteady from his club foot, clinging to a chariot as it careens out of control. the wooden wheel hits a rock or rut, flipping the entire structure. Tutankhamun's body would have been catapulted forward, ribs slamming into the chariot's front rail, his left side taking the full force as he skidded across the ground. The damage matches precisely what trauma surgeons see in modern car crash victims, a pattern of injury too specific to dismiss. But here's where skeptics raise an eyebrow. Egyptian chariots weren't built for speed like Roman racing models. They were lightweight hunting platforms designed for stability over sand. Wall paintings might show them in dynamic poses, but realistically, they likely moved at the pace of a brisk trot. Court protocols would have demanded attendants flank the king at all times, bodyguards ready to grab the reins if he faltered. Would they really let their divine ruler risk a fatal joyride? Yet counterarguments emerge. Tutankhamun's burial included not just ceremonial chariots, but practical ones with worn wheels and stress marks, proof they were used, not just displayed. His mummy's leg fractures show no signs of healing, meaning death came swiftly after the injury, and perhaps most telling, the frantic, almost haphazard way his tomb was sealed. If the king died suddenly from an accident, it would explain why his burial chamber feels rushed, why some artifacts were crammed in sideways, as if the priests were working against time. The chariot theory splits scholars like an axe through papyrus. Some point to the broken bones as undeniable proof. Others argue the injuries could have come from a fall down palace stairs or even a battle wound, though no records mention the boy king leading armies. What's undeniable is this: whether by reckless speed or cruel chance, Tutankhamun's body tells a story of violence. His golden world of hunting scenes and gilded splendor ended in pain, his last breath spent not on a throne but in the dust, surrounded by physicians powerless to save him. And so the mystery twists again. If it was an accident, why did his successors work so hard to erase his reign? If it was murder, why leave evidence so blatant in his bones? The chariot crash theory answers some questions but raises others, leaving us staring at those tomb paintings, wondering if the artists unknowingly captured the moment everything began to unravel. Hidden within Tutankhamun's fragile bones lay another silent killer, one that modern science dragged into the light nearly 3,000 years after his death. When researchers analyzed the young pharaoh's DNA, they found traces of Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest strain of malaria parasites known to humanity. This wasn't just a passing infection. Genetic evidence suggests Tutankhamun suffered repeated, debilitating bouts of the disease throughout his short life. Imagine the feverish nights in the royal bedchamber, servants fanning his sweat-drenched body as the parasites multiplied in his blood. The same golden kingdom that built pyramids and temples had no defense against this microscopic menace. Malaria doesn't kill quickly. It chips away at the body over time, causing anemia, exhaustion, and a weakened immune system. For a teenager already crippled by Kohler's disease, a rare condition that starves the foot bones of blood, this constant biological siege would have left him vulnerable to even minor injuries. That fractured femur we discussed earlier, for a healthy person, it might have been survivable. But in Tutankhamun's compromised state, the break could have become a death sentence. Open wounds in malaria patients are breeding grounds for infection, and without antibiotics, septic shock would have been inevitable. The timing adds another layer of tragedy. Scholars believe Tutankhamun died in winter, when malaria-carrying mosquitoes were least active. This suggests he wasn't battling a fresh infection, but rather the accumulated damage from years of recurring fevers. His liver and spleen, enlarged from filtering damaged blood cells, would have been tender to the touch. His skin might have carried the yellowish tint of chronic anemia. Even the cane found in his tomb takes on new meaning, not just a tool for his club foot, but a crutch for a body worn down by invisible invaders. Yet malaria's deadliest weapon wasn't the fever or chills, it was the way it masked other dangers. A king suffering dizzy spells from anemia could easily lose his balance in a chariot. delirium from high fever might explain why no guards prevented a risky ride. Some researchers even speculate the embalmers removed Tutankhamun's heart not out of malice, but because the organ was ravaged by the parasite's damage. The disease didn't just weaken him, it stacked the deck against his survival at every turn. What makes this discovery so haunting is how ordinary it renders his death. No grand conspiracy, no shadowy assassin, just a sick boy pushing his broken body too far in a world where medicine couldn't save him. The same marshes that gave Egypt life in the Nile's floods also bred the mosquitoes that doomed its king. In the end, Tutankhamun's golden legacy was undone not by human hands, but by nature's smallest, most indifferent killers, creatures so tiny they slipped through history unnoticed until now. When Tutankhamun's tomb was sealed, the man who presided over his funeral rites wasn't a grieving father or loyal general. It was his own vizier, an elderly advisor who swiftly claimed the throne for himself. The scenes painted on I's own tomb tell a chilling story. There he stands performing the sacred opening of the mouth ceremony over Tutankhamun's mummy, a ritual meant to restore the senses in the afterlife. But this wasn't just piety, it was a calculated display of legitimacy. By overseeing the burial, I positioned himself as the natural successor, the guardian of tradition in a shaken kingdom. And then, with the tomb barely sealed, he took an even bolder step, marrying Tutankhamun's widow, Ankhesenamun, despite being old enough to be her grandfather. The marriage was less about romance than raw political survival. In Egypt's rigid hierarchy, a queen couldn't rule alone. She needed a pharaoh by her side. Ankhesenamun, barely out of her teens, suddenly found herself wed to a man who had served her family for decades. But here's where history takes a sinister turn. A cache of clay tablets discovered in Turkey, the Amarna letters, reveals a desperate plea from an Egyptian queen, believed to be Ankhesenamun, to the Hittite king. "Send me your son, and I will make him my husband. I will not take a servant of mine and make him king." The words drip with fear. Was she trying to escape I's grasp by inviting a foreign prince to seize the throne? The Hittite king, suspicious but intrigued, sent his youngest son, Zananza, to Egypt. He never arrived. The prince vanished en route, likely ambushed, an act that would later spark a war between the empires. Meanwhile, I cemented his power, ruling for just 4 years before his own death. His tomb, though far grander than Tutankhamun's, was later defaced, his name chiseled out by his own successor, Horemheb. The erasure suggests even the court turned against him, as if his rise to power carried the stench of betrayal. Was I a caretaker stabilizing a fractured dynasty, or a schemer who manipulated a grieving queen? The evidence tilts toward the latter. Forensic analysis of Tutankhamun's mummy shows his skull was packed with resin after death, a highly unusual practice some interpret as a cover-up for trauma. And then there's the fate of Ankhesenamun herself. After I's death, she disappears from history entirely. No tomb, no records, not even a whispered mention. In a civilization that documented everything, her silence screams. The Amarna letters and I's rushed coronation weave a tapestry of dread. A young widow cornered, a foreign prince murdered, and an old man seizing power while the boy king's body was still warm. If Tutankhamun's death was an accident, why the frantic maneuvering? If it was natural, why the queen's desperate bid for escape? I's brief reign leaves more questions than answers, his legacy buried deeper than the treasures he helped inter. And as the sands reclaim these secrets, one truth lingers. The golden age of the pharaohs was built on bones, and few skeletons rattle louder than those left in I's wake. Beneath the golden veneer of Tutankhamun's burial lies a shadow some scholars refuse to ignore, the lingering specter of poison. Initial tests on the king's hair in the 1960s detected elevated arsenic levels, sparking whispers of assassination by a slow, insidious killer. Ancient Egyptians knew the deadly properties of arsenic, using it in pesticides and even cosmetics. Could someone have slipped it into the young pharaoh's wine over weeks or months, weakening him until a final, lethal dose? The theory gained traction when researchers noted how Tutankhamun's tomb contained unusual enemy figurines, bound statues representing those who might harm the king in the afterlife. Traditional burials included generic foes, but these were disturbingly specific, their features carefully detailed as if modeled after real individuals. Were these curses aimed at unseen conspirators? Yet science, as always, complicates the narrative. Later studies challenged the arsenic findings, pointing out that contamination from embalming materials or environmental exposure could skew the results. More damningly, Tutankhamun's mummy shows no classic signs of chronic poisoning, no telltale hair loss, no distinctive nail banding, no shriveled liver documented in the embalming rites. But poison's allure persists because of the volatile world Tutankhamun inherited. His father Akhenaten's religious revolution had torn Egypt apart, elevating the sun disk Aten as the sole god while suppressing the powerful Amun priesthood. Temples were shuttered, ceremonies banned, and the capital moved to a barren new city called Akhenaten. When Tutankhamun reversed these reforms, restoring Amun, reopening temples, and moving the court back to Thebes, he didn't just change policy. He humiliated those who'd thrived under his father's regime. Imagine the fury of the displaced Atenist elite, priests stripped of influence, courtiers exiled from Akhenaten's inner circle, military leaders who'd backed the old order. These weren't just disappointed officials, they were men with the means and motive to strike back. In ancient Egypt, poison was a woman's weapon, often administered by trusted servants in the royal household. A single loyalist slipping henbane into a goblet, or a physician prescribing tainted medicine, could explain Tutankhamun's gradual decline before his sudden death. The political timing is equally suspicious. His restoration of the old gods was still fragile, his power propped up by advisors like Ai and Hormuzd, both of whom ultimately benefited from his demise. Even the burial itself hints at cover-ups. The rushed embalming, the missing heart, the blackened resins, all could point to a body hastily prepared to hide evidence. And then there's the fate of Tutankhamun's widow, Ankhesenamun, whose desperate letter to the Hittites suggests she feared someone in her own court. The poisoning theory may lack forensic certainty, but it persists because it fits the jagged pieces of history. A boy king caught between warring ideologies, surrounded by men who stood to gain from his silence. Whether by arsenic or ambition, Tutankhamun's death may have been less an accident than the last act of a bloody family drama, one where the victors wrote the story and the truth was buried in gold. The fractures along Tutankhamun's ribcage tell two very different stories depending on which scientific examination you trust. And the gap between those versions reveals just how fragile our understanding of his death truly is. When British scientist Ronald Harrison X-rayed the mummy in 1968, his team documented multiple broken ribs on the right side, including one pushed inward toward the lungs. These weren't just cracks, they were violent compressive fractures, the kind that happen when tremendous force is applied to the chest. Harrison's notes suggested these injuries occurred around the time of death, sparking immediate speculation. Could this be evidence of a chariot wheel rolling over the young king's torso during a crash, or worse, signs of a deliberate beating in some palace coup? But when Dr. Zahi Hawas's team performed the far more detailed CT scan in 2005, those same fractures were nowhere to be found. The high-resolution images showed intact rib bones with no signs of pre-mortem breaks. This contradiction isn't just academic, it strikes at the heart of whether Tutankhamun's death involved foul play or tragic misadventure. One possible explanation lies in the brutal reality of early 20th century archaeology. Howard Carter's team famously struggled to extract the mummy from its golden coffin, resorting to sawing through the resin-hardened linen and even using hot knives to separate the body from the burial mask. During this rough handling, ribs could have easily snapped under pressure, only to be mistaken decades later as ancient injuries. Yet some researchers refuse to dismiss the 60s X-rays entirely. They point out that perimortem fractures, those occurring at or near death, don't always leave the same clear marks as older healed breaks. In a body already undergoing decomposition before mummification, bones might crack without the telltale signs of trauma seen in living tissue. The resin poured by embalmers could have further obscured the damage, filling fractures like glue and making them invisible to modern scanners. If that's the case, the truth might lie somewhere between both examinations. Ribs broken not by Carter's chisels, but by some violent impact in Tutankhamun's final hours, their evidence smoothed over by time and ritual. What gives this debate teeth is the context surrounding those ribs. The right side of the chest houses the liver, an organ the Egyptians considered sacred, the seat of emotion and wisdom. A crushing injury there wouldn't just be physically devastating, it carried spiritual weight. And then there's the missing heart, the organ Egyptians believed would be weighed in the afterlife. If Tutankhamun's ribs were fractured perimortem, was his heart removed because it was too damaged to preserve? Or was its absence part of a darker ritual, a way to silence him even in the realm of Osiris? The broken rib enigma ultimately exposes the limits of modern forensics when applied to ancient remains. Science can illuminate shadows, but not every mark on a 3,000-year-old body will surrender its secrets. Whether those fractures came from a chariot accident, an assassin's club, or an overzealous archaeologist's tools, their ambiguity keeps the mystery alive, a reminder that some truths may stay forever buried beneath layers of gold and time. The moment Howard Carter's team peeled back the linen wrappings from Tutankhamun's mummy, they faced a shocking sight, not the pristine golden skin of a god-king, but a charred, brittle shell cracked with age. The flesh had turned black in strange patches, baked hard as if scorched by fire. At first glance, it seemed the embalmers had botched their sacred duty, perhaps overheating the resins they used to preserve the body. But Egyptologists soon realized this wasn't just sloppy work, it was something far more peculiar. When comparing Tutankhamun's mummy to others from his dynasty, the differences are staggering. Royal mummies like Ramses II or Seti I were carefully preserved, their skin leathery but intact, their features still recognizable after millennia. Tutankhamun, by contrast, looks almost mummified twice, first by ancient hands, then by some unseen force that left him brittle and cracked. Chemical analysis reveals why. His body was drenched in abnormally high amounts of embalming resin, poured in such excess that it pooled around his bones, even filling his skull cavity. Under the heat of the tomb, these resins underwent a chemical reaction, essentially cooking the king's remains from the inside out. The question isn't just why they used so much resin, but why they used it so carelessly. One theory points to panic. Royal embalming normally took 70 days, a meticulous process of drying the body with natron salt, removing organs, and anointing the skin with oils. Tutankhamun's mummy suggests a rushed job, perhaps because his death came unexpectedly, leaving priests scrambling to finish before decomposition set in. The missing ribs and heart, the resin poured haphazardly into the chest cavity, even the way his skull was packed, all hint at a team working against the clock. But another possibility chills the blood. What if the excess resin wasn't an accident at all? In ancient Egypt, resins weren't just preservatives, they were ritual barriers sealing the body against spiritual corruption. Could someone have deliberately drowned Tutankhamun's remains in resin to hide evidence of foul play? The blackened skin might have masked bruises or wounds. The hardened resin filling his skull could have obscured a fatal blow. Even the missing heart takes on new menace, removed not for tradition, but to ensure the king couldn't testify against his killers in the afterlife. The truth may lie between both theories. Tutankhamun's embalmers faced a unique challenge. A young king dead from traumatic injuries, his flesh already damaged when it reached their tables. The resin overdose might have been their desperate attempt to stabilize a body falling apart. Yet the sheer violence of the process, the cracked bones, the melted skin, leaves room for darker interpretations. In the end, the mummy's ruined state serves as its own kind of evidence, a silent witness to either panic or conspiracy. And like so much in this mystery, the line between accident and assassination blurs beneath layers of dried resin and time. In the weighing of the heart ceremony, ancient Egypt's most sacred trial, the deceased stood before Osiris, their heart placed on a golden scale against the feather of Maat. A heart heavy with sin would tip the scales, condemning its owner to oblivion, but a pure heart meant eternal paradise. For pharaohs, this ritual wasn't just symbolic, it was the very foundation of their divinity. Which makes Tutankhamun's missing heart not just strange but sacrilegious. Every royal mummy before and after him, even those murdered like Ramses III, had their hearts carefully preserved in place. So why was Tutankhamun's chest cavity empty, his most vital organ seemingly erased from existence? One explanation lies in the chaos of his burial. If Tutankhamun died suddenly from an infected leg wound or chariot crash, his body may have already begun decomposing before embalmers could begin their work. The heart, a spongy organ, might have been too degraded to save dissolving into a mass the priests couldn't feasibly mummify. In their panic, they may have substituted a sacred scarab amulet over the cavity, a quick fix to satisfy ritual requirements. But this theory falters when you examine Ramses III's mummy, the pharaoh whose throat was slit in a harem conspiracy. Despite the violent murder, his embalmers took extraordinary care to preserve his heart, even stuffing the gaping neck wound with linen to maintain his body's sanctity. If they could stabilize a slit throat, why couldn't Tutankhamun's team save a damaged heart? A darker possibility lingers in the shadows. The heart wasn't just weighed in the afterlife, it could also testify, speaking against those who harmed its owner. Some scholars suggest Tutankhamun's heart was removed deliberately, silencing him beyond death. Poison, for instance, leaves traces in the heart's tissue long after other organs decay. If someone had administered a slow-acting toxin, excising the heart would destroy the evidence. Alternatively, the organ might have shown traumatic injuries, a stab wound, a crush fracture, that implicated powerful figures in his court. In either scenario, the message was clear. Not even the gods would hear Tutankhamun's accusations. The contrast with Ramses III deepens the mystery. His embalmers left his heart intact despite his murder, perhaps because his killers were already captured and executed, no need to hide the truth. But Tutankhamun's missing heart hints at conspirators still walking free, men who needed the boy king's voice forever stilled. Even the placement of his replacement scarab is suspicious. While most heart scarabs were inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, Tutankhamun's bears no protective incantations. It's almost as if no one cared to ensure his safe passage to the afterlife. Perhaps the most chilling clue lies in the Amjuat, the ancient funerary text declaring, "Without a heart, the dead cannot see, cannot hear, cannot speak." In a civilization obsessed with eternal justice, Tutankhamun's hollow chest wasn't just an oversight, it was a theft, robbing him of his divine voice in the court of Osiris. Whether by accident or design, the silence of that empty cavity still echoes across 33 centuries, a void where a king's heart should have been. The death of Lord Carnarvon sent shockwaves through the world, not just as the loss of a wealthy patron, but as the first alleged victim of Tutankhamun's curse. Just weeks after the tomb's grand opening, Carnarvon lay dying in a Cairo hotel room, his body ravaged by infection from a seemingly harmless mosquito bite. Newspapers seized the story, printing sensational headlines about the pharaoh's revenge and fabricating an inscription supposedly found in the tomb. "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Never mind that no such text existed, the myth took hold. Then came the domino effect of tragedies. Carnarvon's dog reportedly howled and dropped dead at his English estate the same hour as his passing. A financier connected to the excavation died suddenly from a fever. Even Howard Carter's canary became part of the lore when a cobra symbol of Egyptian royalty allegedly slithered into its cage and devoured it. With each new death, the curse narrative grew, fed by writers like Arthur Conan Doyle, who publicly speculated about elementals guarding the tomb. The public devoured these stories, blending fact and fiction into a potent cocktail of supernatural dread. But peel back the hysteria and a different truth emerges. Of the 58 people present when the tomb was opened, only 8 died within the next decade, statistically unremarkable for the era. Howard Carter himself lived another 16 years, dying of natural causes at 64. Even Carnarvon's death loses its mystique under scrutiny. The man was already in poor health, his lungs damaged by a near-fatal car crash years earlier. That mosquito bite, it became infected not by magic, but because he sliced it open while shaving, introducing bacteria into his weakened system. Science offers a far more plausible and fascinating explanation for the curse. Sealed tombs developed their own ecosystems over millennia. When researchers analyzed air samples from similar burial chambers, they found high concentrations of Aspergillus niger and other toxic molds. These fungi thrive in darkness, feeding on organic matter like mummy wrappings and wooden artifacts. Disturbing a tomb after 3,000 years would release a cloud of spores capable of causing severe respiratory distress, especially for those with compromised immunity, like Carnarvon with his damaged lungs. What witnesses called the Pharaoh's breath was likely an invisible storm of ancient microorganisms, punishing intruders not with supernatural fury, but with perfectly natural consequences. The real curse wasn't inscribed on any tomb wall. It was human psychology. Our brains crave patterns, stitching random events into narratives of cause and effect. When Carnarvon died so soon after opening the tomb, people connected dots that didn't exist. The irony, Tutankhamun himself suffered from multiple infections in life. The boy king might have chuckled at the idea that his decaying remains held any power. His own body had been betrayed by malaria, a club foot, and likely sepsis. The curse endures not because it's real, but because we want it to be. Somewhere between the mold spores and the newspaper headlines, Tutankhamun got the last laugh after all. Tucked among the golden treasures in Tutankhamun's tomb lay something far more revealing, his personal arsenal. 2 ornate daggers rested alongside the mummy, one with a blade of gleaming gold, the other forged from something far rarer, iron. At first glance, this might seem unremarkable, but in Bronze Age Egypt, iron was more precious than gemstones. Recent X-ray scans confirmed the unthinkable. This dagger's metal came not from Earth, but from a meteorite. The high nickel content matched space rock fragments found in the Red Sea, proving ancient Egyptians crafted weapons from celestial metal. But here's what's truly fascinating. The blade shows microscopic wear patterns along its edge, tiny striations that suggest it wasn't just ceremonial. Tutankhamun, or those guarding him, likely carried this dagger in life, its otherworldly metal glinting in the desert sun. Then there are the bows, not the pristine, unused artifacts you'd expect in a royal burial, but weapons bearing the marks of real stress. 6 composite bows lay in the tomb, their curved limbs designed to unleash arrows with terrifying force, yet several show unnatural bends as if deliberately snapped. Archaeologists call this ritual killing, the practice of breaking objects before burial to release their spiritual essence for the afterlife. But one bow tells a different story. Its fractures aren't clean breaks, they're splintered, the kind of damage that happens when a weapon fails under tension. Picture a teenage king drawing the bowstring to its limit during a hunt or training exercise, the wood groaning before it suddenly gives way. This wasn't ritual, it was an accident frozen in time. The chariots add another layer. Though often dismissed as ceremonial, the wear patterns on their axles and wheel hubs tell another tale. Friction marks show repeated use, while repairs with different wood types suggest they weren't just palace display pieces. One even has a repaired wheel, its spokes scarred by rough handling. These weren't gilded toys, they were working vehicles, possibly used in hunts or military drills. The irony is palpable, a king often depicted as frail, buried with tools that speak of active, even vigorous use. Taken together, these weapons paint a portrait of a young ruler caught between two worlds. The meteorite dagger speaks of Egypt's reach, its ability to harness even the heavens for royal power. The bows and chariots, though, whisper of something more human, a boy trying to prove himself, perhaps pushing his body beyond its limits. Whether these weapons failed him in life or were meant to serve him in death, their scars remain, silent witnesses to a king's struggle between divinity and mortality. And in their nicks and fractures, we may find the closest thing to Tutankhamun's own voice, not as a golden mask, but as a young man who gripped these objects, strained them, and left his mark upon them forever. Buried alongside Tutankhamun's golden treasures were 30 wine jars, each carefully labeled with their vintage, vineyard, and even the winemaker's name. But one detail stands out. The most recent jars bear the inscription Year 5, marking the final harvest of the young king's reign. This wasn't just a collection of fine wines, it was a time capsule of his last days. The jars held a blend so potent, modern chemical analysis detected traces of tartaric acid, proof they were filled with real wine, not symbolic substitutes. And the quantity is staggering. 30 jars would have held over 150 gallons, enough to drown a royal court in revelry. So why stockpile so much for the afterlife? Was this frantic overpreparation or simply standard burial extravagance? The evidence tilts toward urgency. Other pharaohs' tombs contained wine, but rarely with such precise dating. The Year 5 labels suggest these jars weren't curated over time. They were grabbed in haste, the newest available vintage shoved into the tomb before the burial was sealed. This aligns with the rushed state of the chamber artifacts crammed in sideways. Resin slopped over the mummy, even the wall paintings showing drips of excess pigment. Yet there's another possibility. These wines might have been part of Tutankhamun's own stock, bottles he drank in life suddenly repurposed for death when tragedy struck. Then there are the figs, 8 baskets of them dried and packed beside the wine. At first glance, they seem like simple burial offerings, but ancient Egyptian medical texts reveal a darker purpose. Figs were prized as medicine, their pulp used to draw out infections or soothe inflamed wounds. Some scholars speculate these weren't just snacks for the afterlife, they were emergency supplies, perhaps even failed remedies for whatever killed the king. The pairing is haunting, wine to numb the pain, figs to heal the flesh, all sealed away with a teenager who never got to use them. The real clue lies in what's missing. Royal tombs typically contain provisions for a 60-day journey through the underworld, enough for the soul's perilous trek to Osiris. Tutankhamun's stash far exceeds that, as if his priests feared he'd need extra sustenance. Compare this to the tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, Tutankhamun's grandfather, whose burial included meticulously organized wines spanning decades, a curated collection, not a hurried grab. The difference is stark. One tomb reflects planning, the other panic. Modern vineyards still grow along the Nile's banks, their grapes ripening under the same sun that warmed Tutankhamun's vineyards. Those Year 5 labels don't just mark a harvest, they freeze a moment when a kingdom scrambled to bury its king. Whether the wine was meant to comfort his spirit or mask the stench of a delayed burial, the jars remain silent witnesses to a death that shocked an empire. And those figs, they crumble to dust now, but their presence whispers of court physicians' desperate attempts to save a dying boy, remedies that failed, sealed forever in a tomb's dry darkness. In 2015, a team of researchers aimed radar scanners at the walls of Tutankhamun's burial chamber, and the results sent shockwaves through Egyptology. The scans revealed faint but unmistakable anomalies behind the painted plaster, hollow spaces, possibly corridors or chambers, lurking just beyond the tomb's known boundaries. Even more electrifying was the theory proposed by archaeologist Nicholas Reeves. He believed one of those hidden spaces might be the long-lost burial of Nefertiti, Tutankhamun's legendary stepmother and Akhenaten's powerful queen. The evidence, the tomb's unusual layout, which resembles an addition grafted onto a larger, pre-existing structure, as if Tutankhamun's burial had been hastily inserted into a corridor meant for someone far more significant. The implications were staggering. Nefertiti's tomb has never been found despite her status as one of ancient Egypt's most iconic figures. If her burial lay hidden behind Tutankhamun's, it could rewrite our understanding of the entire Amarna period. The scans even suggested the presence of metal and organic material, hinting at untouched treasures or even additional mummies. But just as the world braced for a breakthrough, the investigation ground to a halt. Egypt's Antiquities Ministry, wary of damaging the fragile tomb with invasive drilling, suspended further exploration. The delicate paintings on Tutankhamun's walls, already stressed by humidity and decades of tourist traffic, couldn't risk the disruption. Critics argued the radar data was inconclusive, pointing out that natural rock formations or rubble-filled corridors could mimic the appearance of hidden chambers. Others questioned Reeves' Nefertiti theory, noting that the tomb's odd shape might reflect rushed construction rather than a repurposed burial. Yet the mystery persists because of one undeniable fact: the Valley of the Kings is riddled with unfinished tunnels and repurposed tombs. Even Tutankhamun's own burial was likely intended for someone else, perhaps a high-ranking official before being adapted for the young king. What makes this unfinished puzzle so tantalizing is the sheer possibility. If those shadows on the radar are chambers, they could hold anything from misplaced royal mummies to entire caches of artifacts. The hesitation to explore further speaks to a larger tension in archaeology, the balance between discovery and preservation. Do we risk harming Tutankhamun's tomb to chase the ghost of Nefertiti, or leave its secrets undisturbed? For now, the answer is silence. The same silence that has filled those unseen spaces for 33 centuries, waiting just beyond the torchlight. The face of Tutankhamun has stared back at us through time in two strikingly different forms, one crafted by Egyptian scientists in 2005, the other by a European team in 2014. Both reconstructions began with the same CT scans of the pharaoh's mummified skull, yet they emerged with features so distinct they could almost be different people. The Egyptian version presents a softer, more rounded face with full lips and a gentle slope to the brow, reflecting the team's interpretation of his genetic profile as a typically North African ruler. His skin carries the warm bronze tones familiar from ancient tomb paintings, his expression serene, almost regal. But turn to the European reconstruction, and the differences leap out: the lips thinner, the skull slightly elongated, the cheekbones more pronounced. Here, Tutankhamun's face bears the subtle hallmarks of his familial inbreeding: a recessed chin, a slightly asymmetrical jaw, and a paler complexion that nods to his mixed ancestry. These divergences aren't just artistic choices, they're rooted in scientific debate. The Egyptian team prioritized the mummy's skull proportions alone, layering muscle and skin based on average tissue depth for his age and suspected ethnicity. Their Tutankhamun resembles the idealized portraits from his own era, smooth and youthful, with none of the deformities hinted at in his DNA. But the European reconstruction factored in the genetic bombshells revealed years later: the cleft palate, the Kohler's disease, the traces of malarial damage. Their version shows a young man whose face might have twitched with pain when walking, whose smile could have been uneven due to dental misalignment. The European model even accounts for the club foot, suggesting he might have leaned slightly to one side, altering the natural symmetry of his features. The most controversial detail, the lips. The Egyptian reconstruction gave Tutankhamun the full, voluptuous mouth seen in countless statues of Amun-era pharaohs, a deliberate nod to artistic tradition. The European team, however, modeled theirs on the actual skull's dental structure narrower, with teeth that might have protruded slightly, creating a tighter lip line. This isn't just about aesthetics, it's a clash between cultural legacy and forensic rigor. One team saw a god king whose image must align with sacred art. The other saw a human being, flaws and all. Yet both reconstructions agree on one haunting detail: the eyes. Whether gazing out from the Egyptian's bronze face or the European's pallid one, Tutankhamun's eyes carry the same weight, heavy with the burden of rule, yet startlingly young. It's a reminder that behind the gold, the DNA, the endless debates, there was once a boy who should have been hunting in the marshes, not buried in a rush beneath the Valley of the Kings. These faces, for all their differences, are mirrors held up to history, reflecting not just what Tutankhamun looked like, but how we choose to see him. The outermost sarcophagus that held Tutankhamun's nested coffins should have been pristine, smooth quartzite carved with sacred precision. But when Howard Carter's team first examined the interior, they found something startling: deep, jagged scratches marring the stone surface. These weren't the delicate etchings of hieroglyphs, they were rough gouges, as if someone had taken a chisel to the coffin in haste or frustration. The marks cluster near the head and shoulder areas, precisely where ancient priests would have performed the opening of the mouth ritual, the ceremony meant to restore the king's senses for the afterlife. Was this evidence of a botched ceremony or something far more suspicious? One theory points to pure logistical chaos. If Tutankhamun's death was sudden, the priests may have raced against decomposition, working in frantic darkness to finish the burial. The quartzite sarcophagus, incredibly heavy and fragile, might have been damaged during a rushed installation. The scratches could be tool slips, desperate attempts to adjust the lid or realign the inner coffins as resin pooled and hardened. Supporting this idea are the mismatched sealings on the sarcophagus itself. The original necropolis seal was broken and clumsily replaced, suggesting the tomb was reopened shortly after burial, perhaps to correct mistakes. But another possibility chills the blood. The sarcophagus shows signs of being adapted for Tutankhamun, not built for him. The interior scratches align eerily with the dimensions of I's burial equipment, the vizier who became Pharaoh after Tutankhamun's death. Could this coffin have been intended for I, only to be repurposed when the boy king died unexpectedly? The gouges might be marks of last-minute resizing, the stone hacked away to fit Tutankhamun's smaller body. If true, it implies a staggering breach of protocol. Egyptian pharaohs were never buried in hand-me-down coffins. The very idea suggests a court in disarray, scrambling to honor a king they never planned to lose. Then there's the ritual angle. The opening of the mouth ceremony required priests to touch ceremonial tools to the mummy's lips, but with the sarcophagus lid sealed, they might have improvised by marking the coffin's interior as a proxy. Some scratches form faint lines near where the mouth would have been, almost like symbolic gestures. Yet this explanation falters when you examine other royal sarcophagi. None show similar damage, not even those of pharaohs who died suddenly. The marks feel less like sacred ritual and more like panic, tools slipping, hands shaking, a burial team operating under unbearable pressure. The most haunting detail: the scratches aren't uniform. Some are shallow and straight, others deep and erratic, as if made by multiple people in conflicting motions. Picture the scene: priests sweating in the torchlight, arguing over how to proceed, their chisel marks overlapping in desperation. Every groove in that quartzite tells a story not of divine ceremony, but of human fallibility. Whether caused by haste, reuse, or ritual chaos, those scratches are the fingerprints of a crisis, etched forever into the stone that failed to protect Egypt's golden boy. The golden funerary mask of Tutankhamun has long been the ultimate symbol of Egyptian royalty, its serene face and striped headdress immortalized in countless photographs. But peer closer at the artifacts behind the glass and something startling emerges. The mask isn't the flawless masterpiece we imagine. Under ultraviolet light, conservators spotted uneven layers of gold, clumsy solder patches, and even a subtle asymmetry in the facial features. The left side sits slightly higher than the right, giving the mask an almost imperceptible tilt. These aren't the marks of master craftsmen taking their time, they're the hurried corrections of artisans working against a deadline. The most damning evidence lies in the hieroglyphs stamped inside the headdress. Originally, they spelled out the title, Beloved of Aten, the sun disk worshipped by Tutankhamun's controversial father, Akhenaten. But someone hastily chiseled out the god's name and replaced it with Beloved of Amun, the traditional deity Tutankhamun restored to power. This erasure wasn't gentle. The gold around the altered text is dented and stretched, as if the metal had been softened with heat and clumsily hammered back into place. The mask's very identity was rewritten, a theological edit made under pressure. Now compare this to the other burial treasures. Tutankhamun's daggers show precision blades with meteorite iron folded hundreds of times. His chariots, though worn, display intricate joinery that hasn't warped in 33 centuries. Even the smallest amulets were carved with obsessive symmetry. Only the mask, the centerpiece of the entire burial, bears these signs of rushed adaptation. So what went wrong? One compelling theory points to the mask's unusual dimensions. Its facial proportions are slightly broader than Tutankhamun's mummy, with a more delicate chin and fuller lips, features that align closer to traditional depictions of Nefertiti than male pharaohs. Could this have been her mask, repurposed when the young king died unexpectedly? The timeline fits. Nefertiti vanished from records around year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, just as Tutankhamun was rising to power. If her burial goods were stored in a Thebes workshop, desperate priests might have grabbed them, hammering the gold into a new shape for the dead boy king. The mask's backstory shifts from regal perfection to something far more human, a last-minute scramble to honor a ruler gone too soon. Every solder line tells a story. The thicker gold layer on the left cheek, perhaps covering where a feminine earring once hung. The uneven hieroglyphs, a scribe's rushed penance for altering a queen's legacy. Even the iconic blue stripes of the headdress show pigment mixed in inconsistent batches, some laps lazily overlapping onto the gold. What makes these flaws so poignant is their contrast with the mask's symbolic weight. This wasn't just burial finery, it was the face Tutankhamun would wear for eternity, the visage Osiris would recognize at the gates of the afterlife. That such a sacred object bears the marks of human panic speaks volumes. The boy king's death didn't just shock his court, it left them scraping together whatever they could to maintain the illusion of divine order. The mask's uneven gold becomes a metaphor for the dynasty itself, gilded on the surface but beneath, a patchwork of desperation and survival. The race to uncover Tutankhamun's secrets began with more destruction than discovery, a tragedy of well-intentioned blunders that erased critical clues forever. When Dr. Douglas Derry first cut into the mummy in 1925, his saw didn't just slice through ancient linen, it severed potential evidence. The team's crude tools left deep gashes in the ribs and pelvis, obscuring fractures that might have revealed whether the king's injuries came from a chariot crash or something more sinister. Worse still, Derry's focus on extracting amulets led him to scatter bone fragments like confetti, losing forever their original placement clues that could have mapped the precise sequence of Tutankhamun's final trauma. Howard Carter's methods weren't any gentler. Desperate to separate the mummy from its golden mask, he directed sunlight through a focused lens to melt the resin sealing the face. The heat warped the skull's delicate structure, twisting bone like candle wax and erasing microscopic trauma patterns that might have shown signs of assault. Even the mummy's infamous charred appearance, likely worsened by Carter's team pouring hot paraffin over the body to stabilize it, a technique that fused tissue and artifacts into an indecipherable mass. Each intervention, however brilliant for its time, acted like an eraser on the delicate chalkboard of history. The 1968 X-ray examination promised a leap forward, but its limitations proved just as costly. The machine could only capture flat, two-dimensional images, missing oblique fractures and compressions that a modern CT scan would have detected instantly. When researchers declared they'd found proof of a murderous blow to Tutankhamun's skull, they were working with shadows on a photographic plate, shadows later revealed to be resin from embalming, not trauma. The machine's fixed angles couldn't peer around the mummy's spine or beneath the jumbled bones in the chest cavity, leaving entire sections of the mystery unresolved. Everything changed in 2005. The arrival of computed tomography allowed scientists to digitally unwrap Tutankhamun without touching a single bandage. Suddenly, they could rotate the mummy in three-dimensional space, zooming in on fractures with pixel-perfect precision. The scans revealed not just breaks, but healing patterns distinguishing injuries sustained in life from post-mortem damage. Even Derry's saw marks became valuable data points, their clean edges contrasting sharply with the ragged fractures of antiquity. Where the X-rays had guessed, the CT scan knew, proving the femur break happened weeks before death, not during it. The true revolution lay in what this technology spared. No blades, no heat, no destructive solvents, just beams of harmless radiation mapping secrets hidden since the Bronze Age. Those early archaeologists weren't careless. They simply lacked the tools to imagine a world where science could be both powerful and gentle. Today's scanners don't just study history, they preserve it for the next generation of curious minds. And as we peer deeper into Tutankhamun's digital shadow, one truth emerges. The greatest discoveries aren't just about what we find, but what we leave intact for others to uncover. The shadows surrounding Tutankhamun's death stretch far beyond scientific debate into the realm of conspiracy theories that read like ancient political thrillers. At the heart of these whispers stands Horemheb, the general who eventually seized the throne after Tutankhamun's vizier had his brief reign. Historical records show Horemheb systematically erased Tutankhamun's name from monuments, replacing it with his own, a move some interpret as the ultimate cover-up. If Horemheb orchestrated the young king's death, it wouldn't have been a crude assassination, but a masterclass in patience. As military commander, he controlled the army. As eventual pharaoh, he rewrote history itself. The irony, Horemheb's own tomb contains depictions of Tutankhamun, suggesting either lingering guilt or a calculated display of false loyalty to appease the gods. Then there's the radical theory that the mummy isn't Tutankhamun at all. Proponents point to the damaged pelvis too wide for a teenage male, they claim, and the unusually elongated skull shape. Could this be the body of another royal, perhaps Smenkhkare, the mysterious co-regent whose fate remains unknown? The argument gains traction from the mummy's missing heart, a deviation from tradition that might signal identity confusion among ancient embalmers. Skeptics counter that genetic testing confirms the mummy's relation to Akhenaten, but the debate persists in fringe Egyptology circles, fueled by the odd proportions of the king's iconic death mask, which fits the mummy poorly. Most explosive is the claim that Tutankhamun's tomb wasn't his to begin with. Dr. Nicholas Reeves' radar scans revealing hidden chambers ignited speculation that KV-62 was originally carved for Nefertiti, whose burial has never been found. The tomb's unusual T-shape and smaller size match queenly tombs more than kingly ones. Wall paintings show figures with softened feminine features beneath the current artwork, as if artists hastily reworked them. Most telling, the orientation of Tutankhamun's sarcophagus placed sideways, violating traditional alignment, as if crammed into a space meant for someone else. These theories, however dramatic, share a common thread. They reflect our modern obsession with scandal where simpler explanations may suffice. Horemheb's erasures could reflect standard dynastic politics rather than murder. The mummy's odd proportions may simply show the physical toll of inbreeding. As for Nefertiti's tomb, The Valley of the Kings is littered with repurposed chambers. Tutankhamun's own may have been borrowed from a noble, not a queen. Yet the persistence of these ideas reveals something profound. We can't accept that history's most famous pharaoh might have died by mundane misfortune. The boy king's golden aura demands a grander exit, one worthy of the mysteries still sealed within his gilded walls. Tutankhamun's fragile bones did more than unravel a 3,000-year-old mystery. They shattered the way we study ancient history itself. Before his tomb's discovery, archaeology was often a treasure hunt, with mummies ripped from their wrappings and artifacts hauled off to museums with little regard for context. But the boy king's fragile remains forced a reckoning. Howard Carter himself, despite his rough methods, spent a decade meticulously cataloguing every scarab and bracelet, setting a new standard for preservation. Modern Egyptology owes its gentler touch to Tutankhamun's legacy. Today's scanners and 3D modeling would have spared his mummy the brutal chisels and hot knives of the 1920s. The interdisciplinary revolution sparked by his death is equally profound. Tutankhamun became the first pharaoh to undergo a CT scan, the first to have his DNA sequenced, the first whose malaria parasites were identified under a microscope. His corpse is now a bridge between eras, linking ancient embalming techniques to modern forensic science. When researchers detected traces of embalming fluid in his skull, it wasn't just a medical detail, it revealed how priests scrambled to stabilize his body post-mortem. The same fractures that once fueled murder theories now help trauma surgeons understand how chariot impacts affect the human skeleton. Tutankhamun's greatest gift to science wasn't his gold, but his body's unwilling role as a time-traveling medical textbook. Global fascination with his health rewrote our image of pharaohs as invincible gods. The club foot, the cane, the genetic defects, they humanized Egypt's rulers in ways no temple inscription ever could. Museums now spotlight royal ailments alongside artifacts, showing how diabetes crippled Hatshepsut or how Ramesses II's arthritis curled his fingers into claws. The irony is crushing. History's most iconic pharaoh was likely its most physically vulnerable, a boy whose DNA carried both divine bloodline and decay. Yet Tutankhamun's frailties birthed something enduring. His tomb's discovery coincided with the dawn of mass media, turning his death into the world's first viral archaeological mystery. Newspapers splashed theories about curses, radio dramas spun tales of palace intrigue, and now TikTok debates his fractures. That spotlight funded digs, inspired careers, and made Egyptology a global passion instead of a niche academic pursuit. The frail king who ruled for barely a decade ended up shaping centuries of scholarship, proof that sometimes the quietest lives echo the loudest through time. So where does this leave us in the final reckoning of Tutankhamun's untimely end? The evidence sprawls like a desert mirage, clear from one angle, distorted from another. On one side, the chariot crash theory stands firm, backed by the grim forensics of his broken femur and shattered pelvis. Picture the scene: a teenage king, already unsteady from his club foot, gripping the reins too tight as his chariot bucks over rough terrain. The impact would have been catastrophic, his left side absorbing the full force as he tumbled into the dust. Combine that with his malaria-weakened body, and even a minor fracture could have spiraled into sepsis, stealing his life in days. The wine and figs buried with him take on new poignancy, not just funeral offerings, but failed remedies for a feverish, agonizing decline. Yet the shadows of foul play linger. The missing heart, the hastily altered funerary mask, and the frantic erasures by successors like Horemheb suggest a court scrambling to hide something. If Tutankhamun's death was accidental, why the rush to chisel his name from monuments? Why the desperation of his widow, Ankhesenamun, begging a foreign prince for rescue, and what of Vizier I, presiding over the burial like a man already measuring the throne for himself? Even the tomb's chaotic state whispers conspiracy artifacts crammed sideways, shrines scorched, as if the funeral were a performance staged under duress. Science, for all its advances, can't deliver a verdict. The CT scans ruled out a blow to the head but left the rib fractures ambiguous. The DNA confirmed his genetic frailty but couldn't prove poison in his veins. Tutankhamun's death remains history's ultimate cold case, a puzzle where forensic clues and political motives collide across 33 centuries. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the murk between accident and assassination, a king already teetering from illness, pushed over the edge by betrayal or a moment's recklessness. Now it's your turn to weigh the evidence. Was Tutankhamun the victim of a tragic mishap, his body broken by the very chariots he loved? Or does the missing heart point to darker forces at work, a throne stolen through murder disguised as misfortune? Cast your vote below and dive deeper into the sources that keep this mystery alive. After all, the Boy King's story isn't just etched in gold. It's written in the cracks between what we know and what we're still uncovering. The sands of Egypt hold their secrets close, but the hunt for answers is far from over.